Should be something like that.
That little guy it works fine?
Yeah, I hope so. I just got it actually, so this is more or less the first time I try it out. But yeah, it receives.
Tell me a little bit about your background.
I'm an architect from Sweden. I've been here for 3 years now. So I started in January 2007, and I was practicing for 8 years before starting up my PhD. So I've been building mostly residential
I
houses.
want you to know that I've started to cook Swedish food because we have a friend who's moved back to Sweden,
Oh yeah,
an antique dealer.
antique dealer.
Fantastic stuff. And devoted to Henningson's lamps,
Mm-hmm.
which he has a great collection, one of the best collections, I think, around. And we bought a few Henningson, a little one. So through him, we've gotten to know something about Sweden.
Wow.
And we're good cooks. So last night we made pork roast with prunes.
Pork roast with prunes. Okay, so what could that be?
With a sauce with a lot of ginger.
Mm-hmm.
Poke a hole in the pork roast and you put garlic, prunes, and ginger.
Yeah.
And you rub it with ginger and you make a sauce and so on. And then last week my wife made Swedish meatballs, but the real stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever been, there's a well-known restaurant in New York, too expensive to go to, called Aquavit.
No, I have not.
And it's a kind of version of Swedish cooking. It's inspired by Swedish cooking, but the guy is a kind of genius. So he does his own thing. And we made Swedish meatballs, very involved. Took all day. Veal, pork, and beef. And all kinds of spices that I've never used. Cumin, caraway, that kind of stuff. Anyway, I'm a Swede.
So getting to know Sweden through lamps and food. That's good.
Right.
Yeah, that's pretty
Lamps
good.
and food. What could be better?
Yeah.
Okay, what can I do to help?
Yeah, I'm starting up I have started up my PhD, but I'm looking at I'm especially interested in looking at the relationship between architecture and urban codes and zoning, and trying to think about that, to write about that, and
It's a great subject.
yeah, I think it's super interesting. I mean, because that is something that everyone is complaining about, but it affects any practitioners. I mean, you can't get around it. You have to deal with the code.
Of course you do.
And my interest is if the code can become generative as well as regulatory, right? So so it's not only regulatory, but you can work against the code. And parallel to that, I'm also very interested in the discipline of urban design. I mean, what happened, how it evolved, and I've been looking at. I'm in New York during the '60s and reading about that and different articles, and then I talked to Dana, and I talked to different people, and they were mentioning that you were part of this whole thing, and also very much involved in inventing new kinds of zoning. Dana mentioned the transfer of development rights. I don't know if that's correct, but you were definitely involved in the special district zoning. I mean, the invention of that. So I thought, wow, this is amazing.
Yeah, you came to the right place.
Yeah.
Even though all that has vanished, that moment is gone, and I don't think it's coming back.
What do you mean, in terms of urban design or in terms of zoning
Both.
inventions?
Well, you can't influence zoning without political power. And there was, the mayor of New York was interested in improving the quality of life in the city of New York. And he gave us the power to do it.
Yeah, it was interesting in that because Lindsay, he got to be the mayor in 1966, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the task force for urban design also started in 1966, as David Graham Shane is writing about.
Yeah, but that really was created as a vehicle, as a political vehicle to legitimize what had already been decided was the agenda, the policy agenda.
Uh-huh.
So the mayor created this distinguished panel, which was run by a man named Paley, who was head of...
Cesar Pele?
He was chairman of CBS, which is Channel 2 today on the TV, but was a media empire at that time. Radio stations, television stations. It was the most important media business in the United States at that time. And Paley was an unusual man with a major collection of modern art. And I remember going there for a cup of coffee at 8 in the morning, and Paley came in a silk dressing gown, and on the wall behind him was Picasso's Boy with a Horse.
Wow.
I was almost speechless.
I bet I would have been.
And that was just one of many. And he was chairman of the board of the Museum of Modern Art.
So when was this?
Well, it would have been the 66, 67. It was the first year of Lindsay's administration. We had written all of his policy papers on urban design and planning during his mayoralty campaign when he was running for office. And by a series of accidents, and we became involved in the campaign and were assigned to Coney Island.
Working. Yeah, sorry.
Coney Island is where the amusement park is in New York. And we had all recently graduated from Yale. I had studied with Kahn at Pennsylvania. Kahn and Venturi were my teachers. And the great French engineer Le Récollet. And the other guys were from Yale.
Mm-hmm.
And I got them, I had a relative who was active in the campaign to elect Lindsay and introduced us to Lindsay's senior policy guy, who later became chairman of the city planning department.
And what was his name?
Donald Elliott.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I recognize that.
And he was in charge of all the policy stuff. He was a partner, a law partner of Lindsay's. And he sent us out to Coney Island. And we went to a community meeting which turned into a riot. Police were called, and we barely got away. in our little Volvo,
Oh yeah.
the old teardrop Volvo.
Yeah.
There were 5 of us in that car.
Oh wow.
And when we drove out, some little black kids, 9, 10, 11, 12, jumped on the car, hung upside down looking through the windshield, and banged on the roof.
Oh wow.
And that was our introduction to urban design as it's actually practiced. No one had ever mentioned the word community to us at Yale and Harvard and Penn.
That's interesting.
We were in another world, in the clouds, with Kahn and Venturi and Jim Sterling, who was teaching at Yale, and so on. And the mayor had to make a campaign speech in Coney Island because there was a controversy about low-income housing, the city planning low-income housing in a middle-class neighborhood. And Lindsay was going to give a speech, and they were desperate. They didn't have much money.
You mean
the campaign,
the Lindsay
which is
campaign.
why
Yeah.
they took a bunch of intellectuals whom they didn't know,
And turn into
but we were
practitioners.
willing to work for nothing, and we thought, well, we'll learn something about politics, we'll get foundation grants and go to Europe and have a couple of years studying European planning methods, and
Mhm.
we didn't know, really. We had no interest in politics. We had interest in gaining an experience that would give us leverage to travel in Europe.
That's a good interest.
However, there was also a moment. It was the 60s, and protests, and Vietnam, and there was also an undercurrent of civic action on the part of young people.
Mhm.
And that also was why we thought, well, it'd be fun to work in it. It was a summer. Things were slow in the architectural offices we were working in. And there was this attractive guy running for mayor. He was movie star charisma.
Mhm, mhm,
He
mhm.
was a beautiful man. And well-educated, loved the theater, and all the arts really, but mostly the theater. And I had begun in the theater before I went into architecture.
Okay.
So there was a certain affinity there, although I didn't meet him until much later. Anyway, there we were, the sort of advanced guard, and the mayor was going to give a speech in 2 weeks. So what we did, was sort of simple, but it was radical in those days. One of us was in Coney Island every day for 10 days. And we would go into the bars and talk to people, and what's all this fuss about the housing proposal, and what do you think, and in the newspaper shops, and we got to know what the people on the street thought about all of this.
Mhm.
And we also, by the end of 10 days, we knew the geography of the place very well. You know, where the streets were, where the housing was proposed. We talked to the police, we knew where crime was concentrated. We didn't do this intentionally, but it's what happened because we actually went there and talked to people.
That's interesting because, I mean, David Graham Shane, he writes that urban design became a profession with Mayor Lindsay's Task Force 66. And, I mean, would you say that is, I mean, you went from academia into practice, and as I understand it, I mean, you did that through some kind of community interaction.
Well, we didn't think of it. We were trying to solve problems.
Mm-hmm.
And this guy Elliot was extremely subtle person, a very good person, very smart. His father was a minister. He was very clear about his social values, but he was also very shrewd. So he handled us in a very clever way by giving us responsibility. And if we had made mistakes, he would have gotten rid of us. But he was willing to see what we could do. He didn't know anything about urban design, architecture, planning. He was a politician thinking about the problems of the city, the ethnic problems, the health problems, the human resources, but also physical planning, real estate development. Those were his interests. One of us was an accomplished writer. His name is Jonathan Barnett.
Mm-hmm. I was going to ask you about him, yeah.
So Elliot said to us, why don't you guys write the mayor's speech in Coney Island? Give it a try. So we put together the speech based on what we had learned, and John wrote it because he was an accomplished writer. He's written many books about urban design. And he played the clavichord, the harpsichord. His parents taught music, so he was the least likely of all of us to succeed in this role because he was basically an academic musician.
Okay. Getting involved in Coney Island.
Right. So they gave this speech to Elliot. We gave the speech to Elliot, and he took it to Lindsay. And Lindsay's political advisors said, don't touch it. These are a bunch of kids. They're intellectuals. They're very nice. They're very smart, but they don't know anything about about politics. That's not what they do. They make beautiful buildings. But three of us were from Yale, including Barnett.
Yes, those are good.
And Lindsay was from Yale.
Oh, okay.
So he said, what the hell, it's just Coney Island. You know, our chances of winning this campaign are 1 in 10 anyway, so let's have a little fun. So he gave the speech. And it was a huge success because he sounded like he knew everything about Coney Island, where things were, what people who lived here thought, and people who lived here thought, and so forth and so on. It made it sound like he knew what he was talking about because he mentioned street names and certain favorite hangouts and the basketball game that everyone goes to on Saturday morning in the high school, blah, 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 blah. So we weren't stupid. I mean, we put things in there that only someone who knew Coney Island would know about because we'd spent a lot of time there. And we were immediately considered the